primary view of the history of the West begins after the European settlers began looking westward to extend the frontier. In the simplest of terms, the frontier is where the white population ends and faces Native American lands. This illustrates where the frontier existed in 1775 with the original 13 colonies. The frontier definition is not static. It keeps moving westward, as represented in this early chromolithograph depicting these early settlers moving into Native American lands. The artists of the period were encouraged to paint images of promise the expanding frontier offered them, to encourage settlers to cross into these new territories. The most widely known figure of this era was Daniel Boone, born in 1734 and known as the Great Pathfinder. Pictured here is an idealized image of Boone leading early settlers westward through the Cumberland Gap. This was a natural path through the Appalachian Mountains to settle Kentucky, then beyond the borders of the original colonies. Boone went on to fight in the Revolutionary War and was elected 3 times to the Virginia General Assembly. Boone was known for his wit and pithy quotes. Once, when asked if he ever got lost, his reply was, quote, "I've never been lost, but I will admit to being mighty turned around for 3 days." Now for the myth part. Daniel Boone never wore a coonskin cap. He called them obnoxious. The men who pushed that movement are represented by Harry Jackson's sculpture entitled The Pennsylvania Rifleman, which roughly depicts 1730. Neither the greatest novelist nor Hollywood film could capture the life of Harry Jackson. Consider these highlights. Born in Chicago in 1924 and raised adjacent to the stockyards, knew from age 5 what he wanted to be. Ran away at 14 years old to work on the Pitchfork Ranch just outside Cody, Wyoming. Seen here as the youngest of these ranch hands. At 18, joins the Marines and serves in the 2nd Marine Division and is severely wounded in Tarawa and Saipan. The undiagnosed results of these wounds plagued him all his life. Upon his return, he settled in New York and became an abstract expressionist painter with a promising career ahead of him. Became a close friend and drinking buddy of Jackson Pollock, seen here in his Model A Ford, bought for $250 that Harry lent him. Eventually, he returns to his roots, Cody, Wyoming. Harry Jackson lives the life he was meant to and becomes a world-recognized sculptor of Western themes and often credited with bringing back the legacy of Frederick Remington. A favorite of Ronald Reagan, he had 8 pieces of Harry's in the White House. The New York Times wrote his long career was unlike any other in recent history of American art. He started out as an abstract expressionist and evolved into a realist. Usually, it's the other way around. We've discussed Harry Jackson, and this photo shows him in front of a massive 56-foot mural, which he was commissioned to paint in 1964. The intent was to install it in the Fort Pitt Museum in Pittsburgh. The subject reprises events during the 9-year-long French and Indian Wars. Jackson adapted several of the mural's images into bronze sculpture, including the trapper. One can see the image of the trapper moving cautiously through the terrain, carrying his beaver pelts on his back, and carefully seeking to avoid both the French and the British. In this lengthy war, the trapper's focus was on catching, trading, and getting beaver pelts to market, and avoiding taking sides with either of the combatants. In addition to reinvigorating the Western bronze tradition from Remington's days, Harry Jackson brought back color to bronze casting, undoubtedly influenced by his days as a painter. Color, or polychrome, casting went back to the Renaissance period in Europe, but had been lost over the centuries. This is Jackson with the polychrome Iroquois guide figure. Behind him is a section of the large mural Harry was working on at the time, which includes the guide cautiously moving through a wooded area. This brilliantly colored image of an Iroquois guide historically represents the French and Indian Wars, 1754 to 1763, when Indian tribes had to show their loyalty by either supporting the French or the British. This figure served as the guide for a young George Washington serving as a lieutenant colonel in the Virginia State Militia. This image portrays Washington's attack on a French position that's often credited as the actual start of this 9-year-long war. The Iroquois Confederacy united 5 tribes: Mohawk, Onondaga, Cayuga, Oneida, and Seneca, with a 6th somewhat later. At the arrival of the Europeans, they were a sophisticated, thriving confederacy of 5,000 members. They were totally unique. They were the oldest living participatory democracy on Earth. That's worth repeating. The oldest living participatory democracy on Earth. In 1744, the Onondaga chief addressed representatives of the 13 colonies with the plea that they follow the Iroquois plan. This inspired Benjamin Franklin and other leaders. History has acknowledged the impact this had on the foundation of our democracy. As tensions between the British and the French in Canada worsened, the Iroquois relations with the French worsened as well. Pressure from both sides forced the Confederation to take sides, some with the French, some with the British. By the Revolutionary War, the Iroquois again split loyalties, and by war's end, both sides were ruined, their lands confiscated, and those siding with the colonists received no compensation for their loyalty. There was peace, but no victory for the Iroquois. Episode 3 focuses on the explorers Lewis and Clark and the early artists of the West, George Catlin and Carl Bodmer.